Hello. Am I streaming? Okay, hopefully I'm streaming. I don't... Yeah, okay. Hi, welcome back, if you're back. If not, just to introduce myself, my name is Mary Ellis. Welcome to Neocolonialism. And in the stream, basically, I am reading Neocolonialism. We watch clips, we learn, we talk about what we're learning. And yeah, so that's the main. If you are there, let me know. So I'm having trouble, so give me one moment. I'm not sure if I'm streaming. Let's see. I am streaming. Okay, so welcome. My name is Marielis. I am a Dominican American living in Norway. And basically the reason that I did this, started this channel is to inform myself, to kind of back my passion for humanitarian and humanism. We all know the world is shit. There's a lot of things happening, but we also have been propagandized through our education, through movies. And so the purpose is to kind of decolonialize our brains, learn of what's actually happening and maybe of alternative solutions. It is not to do any, I believe that the revolution starts with education. We have to know what we have been told. We have to know what is the truth for us to feel that motivation to make changes, not just be upset and kind of drained and disillusioned by the world and kind of letting it be there, but also to, after you feel those things, because you're gonna feel those things, after you feel those things, the goal is to educate yourself so that you can have drive, so that you can have push to make changes, and you only know what those options are when you have been educated. So this is my goal for myself. This is why I'm reading these books, so that I myself can be educated. So I welcome anybody to jump in and be a part of this this mission, this goal, this track that I am on. The first thing that I do in the streams is I first go into the summary of everything that we have read. So up until this point, we have read the introduction, we know who our author is, we have read the first and second, and we started the second chapters. Actually, I named the introduction the first chapter, so we're actually on chapter 3, if we see it that way. And basically, I just go over the things that we have learned up to this point. So I will share with you guys my notes so that you can follow with me. Let's see, where are they? I might have not added them. All right, so I don't think I added them, but let's just go over them here. So we learned about our author, Kwame Nkrumah. We know that he was the first prime minister of the Gold Coast, which was Ghana's previous name. He was also the first prime minister of Ghana once they received their independence from Britain, which he was an influential figure in, and he was the first president of Ghana once their government, changed the governmental structure. He was educated in the United States in London. He was influenced by some of the social movements, the civil rights movements, by some of the speakers, some influential figures in New York City. And he studied philosophy, so he has a lot of what moves him, and a lot of the solutions that he comes up with are things that he read himself. So he's a Karl Marx and communist socialist inspirational writers that he gets a lot of what he put into practice in Ghana. So that's some of the information on him. In chapter 1, we learned that neocolonialism is actually worse than its predecessor, than industrialization. So we learned the reason is because with imperialism, with imperialism, colonialism, the original, you have the European forces, the West, actually inhabitant being settlers in the colonies, and they have to also then go back to the Catholic Church or whoever the government is, and they have to report on the things that they have done and how things are basically moving along. With neocolonialism, they can be hands off. They can be like, this is not my country, and they can just impose unfair terms on the territories. And if they accept them, that's on them. You know, they're obviously going to benefit us more than them. If they accept them, that's on them. So it's actually worse because a lot of these things are predatory. And some of the things that they use, they use financial agreements. They implant their politicians, and they have military for protection. And a lot of times the way that we see it in today's world is that they have the military presence to protect the resources that they are extracting. So, and a lot of these ways that they're helping, the aid that they do provide always comes with restrictions. For example, they can't use money that they have been, that is in the agreement to build infrastructure or to fund schools or hospitals or anything like that. They have to use it for military bases and to protect the resources. So that's one of the examples. There are obviously many examples, and we're going to go into some of those that we see in chapter 1. What else did we learn in chapter 1? Neocolonializers, so the powers, find it difficult to help the poor countries because it is negatively affecting their citizens. So, you know, a lot of these deals that they make is like I said, it's predatory, but it helps them get the resources at a very low cost, and with that, they can then manufacture the products themselves, and sell it to their customers at a price that they know that their populations can afford. When if the territories, the neocolonialized territories, are to have their way and can actually be competitive, then those prices will be much higher. So that's one of the conflicting things that even good politicians face, that they have to make a decision. Do I help them or do I keep the status quo for us, kind of? And many times, all the times, they choose to keep the status quo for them. Yes. They also know that this is not sustainable. So when I say they, I'm talking about the Western world, the colonizers, the neocolonializers. They know that this is not sustainable. So there is a time limit on how long this can last, and so they're okay with that. They just kind of push it down, for later. They're just like, you know what, somebody else can deal with it. I don't want the backlash. Let's see. Then we went into chapter 2, and chapter 2 was specifying our example to Africa. So, and the African countries. So, of course, with neocolonialism, it exists in other places, South America, Asia, are examples, but this book focuses on Africa for obvious reasons. And so we went over some of the conditions of the African continent, and we learned some pretty heartbreaking things. We learned that even though the population continues to grow, it was 8% at the time of the book of the world population. Now it's 19%. And so that's from 280 million to 1.4 billion. 2% of the world's production is that's how much they do. That's how much manufacturing comes from Africa, just 2%, even though they have such great population and growing. And it's the same as when their population was 8%, now with it being 19%. And we also learned that even though they have 40% capabilities to produce electricity through their through water power, they only produce 11 today. Back when the book was published, it was 5%. Let's see, what else did we learn? Argued that Africa used its own resources. Okay, so the book argues that if Africa actually was to be able to use its own resources to develop itself, it would be a developed continent, fully developed continent. But as we learn, there's so much predatory strategies going on that it is very difficult, and you have to give props to some of these leaders that try. And when you see these mini wars, just know that it's not because they're savages. It's because we're importing weapons there. We're creating uncertainty. We are creating instability, and that is what's causing the politicians have records of like a lot of death and da da da. But just know that it's not those politicians in particular. Sometimes it is, right? But it's not those politicians in particular. It has to do with what we're doing to encourage that. What else? Finished products are sold back to the African at fixed prices, many times, if not all times, at a markup. So they produce their resources, or they extract their resources, they sell them at discounted prices, and then they have to buy it back at regular markup, or sometimes even, higher prices than we would purchase them. The workforce of the countries is divided between like management and the workers, and a lot of the management, the engineers and that sort of thing come from the colonial powers countries, and they're getting paid buku money, while we already know the Africans are getting paid shit. Okay, and then we learned about one of their tactics. So now we're getting into the more specifics. And one of the tactics is, something that they did back when they were colonial, when they were imperialist, they were dividing the countries into very small pieces of land, and then calling them countries because it is easier to divide them. So one of the last things we learned, actually in chapter 3, so I'm kind of going to skip. In chapter 3, we learned that Spain and Portugal together own about 19 separate West African countries. But each one of these little countries has about 2 to 3 million people. So you can see, and even though the majority of the population of Africa lives in West Africa, but they just cut them up into little pieces. Let's go back to chapter 2, I believe we're at. Okay, so per capita, the countries is closely related to, mid-sized manufacturing countries. So some of the smaller countries. And actually, I have created a map. I used ChatGPT Claude to create a map of some of the countries that that is mentioned on the book, and so that we can see the example. Okay, so it's this one. Okay, so in the bubble chart, so we have the 10 smallest African countries, and then we're comparing them. Sorry, this is, AI decided it was going to make the text gray on white, so, So that's what it is. But here you have some of the European countries, Spain, Germany, Norway, where I am. We have about almost 6 million people. But this is how much territory, how much land we have. about 400,000 square meters, I think. But then you see some of these, the smallest African countries. So you see this one has only 10,000 people. You have another one. These are really, really nice. I think I created, where are you? This is the smallest African country. It's right here. Boy, come on. I want to go there. And then you have South, what is it? Oh, I can't read it. Yeah, so then you have, some of these small countries, and you see they have less than 400,000 people. You have one that has 1 million, basically all of these have less than 1 million people, this one as well. Then you have 2 million. So very, very small population in these countries, small landmass, but as long as it's easy to control them, that is the goal. Okay. So I put here, not a surprise, there are apologists in neocolonial powers that urge the territories to focus on feeding their countries versus industrializing. So there's people in the West world that are like, you know what, just forget about industrializing, forget about manufacturing, all of that stuff. Your people are starving. You need to farm. You need to stay within your lane. Just like produce more. But then we have examples. Do you guys remember? Last time we have the example of Nigeria and Ghana where they produced cocoa. They doubled or even tripled the production of cocoa, and their profits were less than when they were producing, less basically. And the reason is because they are not provided with the right insecticides. They're not provided with the right machinery. Some of the crops become are not able to sustain the environment because they're imported, and so they have more work, basically more work, and so therefore you have to put in more money, and therefore you make less money. So, and that is by design. So yes, you have people saying that, even though that they know that it is not. You have to industrialize to be able to feed your people, because otherwise you're going to stay in this same system that continues to create poverty, where you continue to need aid, which come with a bunch of mother effing strings that makes your people more vulnerable. And it makes it so that you then have to give your resources at a cheaper price, which makes it so that you can't make enough money, which makes it so that you can't, provide infrastructure, which makes it so you can't feed your people, and so on and so forth. So it is a very, very predatory system. So whenever you have these people and you listen to them, now you know what you're supposed to be thinking. Do not believe them. They do not have the best interest of Africa. They are trying to keep the system so that they can keep things comfortable for themselves and for their people. I put here the banking system is one of the traps used for currency growth for the colonial powers, basically trying to convince territories to trade and invest in currencies and increase their worth that way. So Kwame argues against that. He says that we would, yeah, yes, but we want to do it in our currency, because we're not making enough money. So we still need to do the thing that we need to do. Like, stop trying to convince us that we should do things the way you wouldn't even do it, which is something that South Africa has been doing. Like, South Africa is one of the most industrialized countries in Africa. And so they're industrialized. They're able to put in money into infrastructure and that sort of thing. But they're not doing manufacturing. They're still very, very vulnerable to the West. So the reason that they have industrialized is because they're being supported, propped up by the West. And it's, racism. So it's because of the white population. Most of the things that West Africa has like a 40% unemployment rate. So it's not a country benefit, And even them, they're still they're very vulnerable to the West. Because a lot of what supports them is investment, is money from the outside. Okay. So here I just mentioned the Ghana and Nigeria example of the production. Africa needs, because that's where the chapter where we read it, Africa needs to come together to put together all of its talents and resources to become independent and not have to give in to these predatory conditions. So if you have one resource in one country, then so you come together and you become more united, less obstacles. You don't, you don't see each other as the enemy. You see each other as everybody trying to get out of the system. Then you will be able to get out of the system because Africa has all of the resources. So it can get out of the system together, but it needs each other. Okay, so I'm trying to go through them, not stick to one chapter for too long. Several examples of how resources specifically to one country and then based on agreements they have with each other. How after selling their resources, Africa has to buy them back. Okay, so these are things that we have already gone over. All right, so in chapter 3, we go over more examples of how they use this tactic of separating countries and what are the benefits to doing that. So the colonial powers encourage them to make separate decisions. So they're actually encouraged to see each other as the other. I mean, look at what you see in South Africa now, where you have immigration coming in from Nigeria, and we know why, because there's things going on in Nigeria that makes it dangerous for some people to stay and live there, and they're moving to South Africa, and then you have the South African people basically make life difficult for those immigrants, so they're seeing each other as other. But, they're not, the white people apparently are not getting any heat, even though they were ignorant immigrants as well. So there's that. Okay, so we have Guinea has example of country that decides, okay, so then we have the countries that do decide to be like, you know what, I'm not going to accept the terms of this horrific predatory contract. Which you see it now, like there's, I forget which country, the U.S. Sent several countries this agreement where they can only get the medical assistance for the medications and that sort of thing for the HIV and AIDS population there, but they can only accept. They will only give them the funds if they accept these additional terms that are not favorable to the country at all. I think one of them was that they have to provide the U.S. all of their privacy information, all of the patient. All of the patient information, and there's some other stuff. In there, I think there's some stuff there about their resources and selling it first to the United States at probably a convenient price. So there's that. So Guinea decided that they weren't going to do that, and France got very upset and decided to punish them. So they decided to not accept one contract, kind of like what's happening now. I mean, but now we're just doing it very openly. I imagine people didn't really know what was going on back then. So then France decided that they were going to just remove everything that they had in Guinea and even the light bulbs. I mean, it was like super, super petty and kind of disgusting. Other countries did slowly follow in not accepting these terms. So you always need that first person that is willing to take the blunt of the consequences, and then suddenly the predatory country, that's what I'm going to call them, the predatory country has to kind of like, back away from being so aggressive, because if they all decide not to get it, then you're not going to get what you want. So you kind of maybe need to change your tune. But this is why they tell them, hey, you guys are all independent thinkers, make your own decisions, because that makes it so that they're more powerful. They can kind of like hoard power over them individually, and you don't want to be the one that suffers the most. But sometimes it's worth it. Let's see. France doesn't gain or lose from these relationships. It is the power that they want. So there was an example where the U.S., I don't know which country it was, but the U.S. and China were sending humanitarian assistance aid to some of the countries that were basically under the neocolonial power of France, and they got so upset. They discouraged it. They were, they were not having it because they did not approve of it. And really, it's all about power, because if you think about it, if the U.S. or China are trying to do this, they're all predatory countries. So France is right, France is right to be upset when they do the humanitarian aid to these countries, because they are trying to gain or remove the French power and trying to place themselves in that place instead. But what needs to happen, obviously, is that Africa just like unites, takes care of itself, because we don't need to replace one predatory country with another. I mean, which one of them is better? You know what I mean? Okay, so in the last chapter, there was quite a lot of information about the French, and some of it was quite like disgusting. Actually, I was kind of grossed out a lot at the end there because of their behavior, their attitude, and some of these agreements were kind of disgusting. But those are details. We basically got the gist. They are awful. So now we will go into, at this point, after going through the review of last time, I will go into a video so that we can kind of take a break, and then we go into some reading. So let's get these. All right, so some of these I have not seen, some I have. So I think this one I have, but I don't remember it, so let's see.
A lot of countries rushed into deals with the U.S. Mm-hmm. They weren't really worth the paper they were written on.
Like
so a lot of buyers, I'll put it back to you and tell me which country you bumped into that's pleased with their deal with the U.S.
You don't think there are any?
This is what I was talking about. This is the Prime Minister of Canada, and he is basically talking about a deal that the U.S. sent over to these African countries, and he's saying, yeah, what do you think? Do you think that they really like them? The journalists, you saw it, so let's continue.
Well, certainly not in private. A lot of countries
deconstruct the cultural hegemony of the ruling class and talk about some of these myths that uphold the power of the ultra wealthy. So, rich people create jobs, so we should all be grateful to rich people.
Rich people don't create jobs. Rich people, i.e. wealthy people, own all the stuff that...
Okay, so this one, I hadn't seen it before. I haven't seen most of these before, but I only saved it because it was talking about decolonializing our minds. I think that's what the title was originally, so I wanted to see what it was about.
we need to survive, because over several hundred years, they have enclosed all of the resources that we need to survive. And then they use that power over everyone else's survival to force people to work for them for less than what they deserve. And the only option you have is work or die, basically. The way that we got to that point was through basically dispossession.
You want to just briefly touch on the history of enclosure? I mean, that was a big one.
This is what Marx and Marxists call primitive accumulation. It's a very important understanding of the way that capitalism developed, right? Because the liberal story of how capitalism developed was that we were all, in our little huts, and one person decided that they would start making shoes, and another one decided they were going to start building boats, and they wanted to trade with each other, but there weren't any markets. So thankfully, we all figured out how to trade with one another, and then we created capitalism.
It sounds funny when you...
I know, it's absurd, right? It's just, that's what they teach you in Economics 101.
Yeah.
The central thing that makes capitalism is not markets, it's capital. And what is capital? It's basically your control over the means of production. So the stuff we need to produce everything. That was land initially. And the enclosures were a process whereby previously common land that was used to kind of graze cattle amongst villages and was kind of held collectively was enclosed into private patches. And it meant that people who had previously relied upon subsistence to be able to survive were no longer able to rely on subsistence to be able to survive. At the same time, you had the rise of industrialization. So you had big industrialists who needed workers, but workers were not willing to leave their places where, life was extremely hard, but they were rooted in their communities, and they weren't willing to kind of give all that up to go and work for an extremely meager wage and also a highly significant chance of death or injury. So what happened was they were forced off the land. The whole idea of primitive accumulation, of enclosure, was to create a landless class of peasants who had no choice other than to sell their labor power in order to survive. And you see this process continuing all around the world today. When they tie your healthcare to your job, or when it becomes impossible to buy a house without an extremely large salary, when it becomes even impossible to rent without an extremely large salary, you end up in this position where you are faced with this choice of work or die, work or be out on the streets. And that isn't a process that's happened naturally. It is a process that has been guided and directed by people who wanted to exploit human labor and use it to augment their profits.
Okay. Yes, I agree with everything she said there. All right, let's get to the reading. So we left off, this we actually read a little bit about last time, but I wanted to review because we're kind of switching gears and from Africa, and we're going into Portugal. Well, actually not switching to from Africa, but we're switching from France to Portugal, sorry. Part of the value of commencing a study of neocolonialism is its African context. In its African context is that it provides examples of every type of the system. It is impossible to define the African situation in terms of independent states divided into the non-aligned and neocolonialist camp, colonies, and racialist states, such as South Africa. In Africa, all former colonies which have now become independent, including particularly South Africa, are subject in some degree to neocolonialist pressures, which, however much they wish to resist, they cannot entirely escape. Struggle as they may, the difference in reality is between these states that accept neocolonialism as a policy and those which resist it. Similarly, the colonial problem of Africa is, in many ways, really neocolonial. The Portuguese African territories appear at first sight only to raise the issue of freedom from colonial rule, but in fact they exist as colonies only because Portugal is itself a neocolonial state. For the last 50 years, the great powers have regarded the Portuguese colonies as counters which they can exchange between themselves in order to readjust the balance of power. In 1913, the British and Germans had initiated an agreement for their divisions, and this was only prevented by the outbreak of the First World War. In the appeasement period to the Second World War, when it was thought that Hitler could be bought off by an offer of colonial territory. The Portuguese colonies were again regarded as suitable bride. Okay, so basically we're switching to Portuguese, and so people can kind of think that these territories, these colonies, are not neocolonialized, but because what it's saying here is that Portugal is basically what does it say? The Portuguese African territory appears at the first sight only to raise the issue freedom from colony rule, but in fact they exist as colonies only because Portugal is itself a neocolonial state. So that is what it's saying. I'm not saying that, but apparently that's what it's saying. And then a lot of the Portuguese colonies are then able to be passed in agreements from one power to another based on like who they want to appease. That's basically what that is saying, which is insanity. If Portugal controls these colonies now, it is only because of the military strength which she derives through her NATO alliance. Portugal is, however, not a member of NATO because of any military assistance which she could render the alliance, but because this is a convenient way by which Portuguese territory can be made available to the forces of other members of the alliance. At the other end of the scale is the French colony of Somalia. It continues to exist as a colony not because France would resist pressure to grant it independence, but because of African disunity. It is a point of dispute between Somalia and Ethiopia. African disunity maintains this colony. It is where, if it were to go on either of its neighbors, it would almost inevitably provoke a conflict between them. So, just another example of how Africa needs to unite. Put his feelings aside. I believe African countries have also been propagandized, to thinking that we're different, and probably some class differences. Africans are just like people. You can propagandize anybody. White people can feel like they are above everybody else because they were propagandized to think that they are above everybody. And if you have the South African Black people be propagandized that they are above the immigrants from Nigeria, then that's what they're going to think. And there's some good disgusting feeling that comes from believing that you're better than others. Rhodesia, while theoretically a colony, is really a fossilized form of an earlier type of neocolonialism which was practiced in southern Africa until the formation of the Union of South Africa. The essence of the Rhodesia system is not to employ individuals drawn from the people of the territory itself to run the country, as in the newer type of neocolonial state, but to utilize instead an alien minority. The majority of the European ruling class of Rhodesia only came to the colony after the Second World War, but it is they and not the African inhabitants who outnumber them 16-1. That Britain regard as the government. This racialized state is protected from outside pressure because under international law, it is a British colony, while Britain herself excuses her failure to exercise her legal rights to prevent the oppression of the exploitation of the African inhabitants, of which, of course, she officially disapproves because of a supposed British Parliamentary Convention. In other words, by maintaining Rhodesia nominally as a colony, Britain in fact gives her official protection as a second South Africa, and the European racialists are left free to treat the African inhabitants as they will. The Rhodesian system thus has all the hallmarks of the neocolonial model. The patron power, Britain, awards to a local government over which it claims to have no control, unlimited rights, and exploitation within the territory. Yet Britain still remains to exclude other countries from intervening, either to liberate its African population or to bring its economy into some other of influence, into some other one of influence. So here we have another disgusting, display of the power at B, saying, you know what, this is neocolonialism. So like, it's not my problem. You can do whatever you want to do. You're the governments, we are hands off. But with the people in power being, racist, basically, and treating the population with disregard at best, then there's maybe other countries that want to intervene, maybe bring humanitarian aid or whatever the case. But Britain is like, no, that is our territory. You can't intervene. Blah blah blah. So there's like this, benefit of, claiming it's not responsible, but also that's mine. You know what I mean? Don't mess with it. So like the people that live there, if you think about it from the humanitarian or humanistic perspective, the people that live there are screwed. Nobody's gonna come to help them because of this basically the structure, this maneuver that Britain decided to do. Maneuver is the word that I'm seeing here. The maneuvering over Rhodesia's independence is an excellent example of the working of neocolonialism and of the practical difficulties to which the system gives rise. A European minority of less than 250,000 could not maintain, in the conditions of Africa today, rule over 4 million Africans without external support from somewhere. When the settlers talk of independence, they are not thinking of standing on their own feet, but merely of seeking a new neocolonialist master who would, in their view, be more reliable than Britain. Don't go to France because they're awful. So, Jesus. As will be seen from the chapters which follow, modern neocolonialism is based upon the control of nominally independent states by giant financial interests. These interests often act through or on behalf of a particular capitalist state, but they are quite capable of acting on their own and forcing those imperial countries in which they have a dominant interest to follow their lead. There is, however, an older type of neocolonialism which is based primarily on military considerations. A world power, having decided on principles of global strategy that it is necessary to have a military base in this or that nominally independent country, must ensure that the country where the base is situated is friendly. Here's another reason for balkanization. If the base can be situated in a country which is so constituted economically that it cannot survive without substantial aid from the military power which owns the base, then, so it is argued, the security of the base can be assured. Like so many of the other assumptions of which neocolonialism is based, this one is false. The presence of foreign bases arouses popular hostility to the neocolonial arrangements which permit them more quickly and more surely than does anything else, and throughout Africa these bases are disappearing. Libya may be quoted as an example of how this policy has failed. Libya has had a long colonial history. From the 16th century onward, it was a Turkey colony, but in 1900s, in the heyday of colonialism, France and Italy agreed that if Italy would not oppose France occupying Morocco, France would not occupy Italy occupying Libya. Nice agreement, okay? So when in 1911 and 1912 France was occupying Morocco, Italy went to war with Turkey and defeated her and annexed Libya. Despite promises during the Second World War to the people of Libya that they would never again be subjected to Italian rule, France tried at the peace settlement to have Italy reinstalled in order to support her own position in Tunisia. This solution providing impossible, Libya became nominally independent, but actually under British neocolonial control. So basically, you're always you're always subject to somebody else's decision. You can just be traded off, whenever it is convenient for the parent country, the colonial powers to trade you off. You can't, this is not a good system. You're just property. Literally. All right, let's watch another video. Wait, which one is that? There you go. Okay, so. Oh, lordy lord. Here we go. Goodness gracious. I need practice. Let's see what this guy's saying. Yeah, this is to me this is heartbreaking. He's basically saying, yep, what we thought was true. Yep. They're training us to do this. They're training us to murder and to cause instability. And I'm glad he's saying something. I'm glad he's speaking out. I hope he's safe.
Million skilled Africans leave the continent every year. Doctors, nurses. Africans leave the continent every year. Doctors, nurses, engineers, scientists. There are now more Ghanaian nurses working in the UK than in Ghana itself. 500 leave every month. NHS recruitment of Ghanaian nurses rose 1,328% between 2019 and 2022. Nigeria lost over 6,700 doctors to the NHS alone, leaving one doctor for every 5,000 patients. 57% of Africans don't have access to quality health care. By 2030, Africa will be 5.3 million healthcare workers short. And while African hospitals sit empty, Nigerian engineers and scientists are in American research labs solving problems that'll advance the West, while Africa's own problems go unsolved. This isn't migration, it's extraction. The UK, US, and Canada have fast-tracked immigration policies to recruit Africa's most skilled professionals. Africa trains them, Africa pays for their education. The West collects on the return of that investment. Ghana's year of the return generated $1.9 billion by offering diaspora professionals tax breaks, investment opportunities, and research grants. The concept of brain gain offers a roadmap. Skilled professionals who migrate can still contribute to their home countries through remittances, through knowledge transfer and investment, while maintaining connections that'll eventually bring them back home. China actively embraced this strategy. They maintained close relationships with students and professionals abroad. They built infrastructure at home, and then they created conditions that made returning worthwhile. It became one of the fastest growing economies in the world. African governments must invest in the same approach, creating research institutions, funding competitive salaries, and then building the infrastructure that makes staying or returning a genuine choice rather than a sacrifice. But none of it is possible while IMF conditions force African governments to cut the public spending that would fund competitive salaries and research institutions. You can't ask a doctor to stay for a fraction of a Western salary when the infrastructure around them has been deliberately starved of investment for decades. Every doctor who leaves takes a generation of patients with them. Every engineer who leaves takes a generation of infrastructure with them. And every scientist who leaves takes a generation of discovery with them. Africa isn't just losing people, it's losing its future in real time. And if you didn't know, now you know.
Yeah, I think we discussed last time about how Africa needs to recruit their professionals. But here we see that they have the professionals. They do have the education system to produce them. They need to keep them. So this is a very, very good point. Okay. Let's go back to the reading. Okay. According to the figures collected by the British Overseas Development Institute, during the period of 1945 to 1963, Libya received no less than 17% of the total bilateral aid which Britain gave to all foreign countries outside of the Commonwealth in that period. The Overseas Development Institute notes that although these payments to Libya are counted as aid, there is no doubt that they are, in essence, straightforward payments to the Libyan government in return for the use of bases. So basically, they're paying them for the bases. Wonder what the conditions of using this aid is. Nevertheless, popular pressure in Libya has now made it necessary for the Libyan government to terminate the military agreement for the bases, for the British bases. These limitations on the real independence of many countries in Africa should not be allowed to be obscure. The very great achievements already gained in the struggle for African independence and unity. In 1945, Africa largely comprised the colonial territories of European powers, and the idea that the greater part of the continent would be independent within 20 years would have seemed impossible to any political observer in the immediate post-war period. Yet not only has independence been achieved, but considerable progress has been made towards the establishment of African unity. To this unity, there are still powerful obstacles that they are no greater than the obstacles already overcome, and if their nature is understood, they are clearly surmountable. Already, and this will ultimately be the decisive factor, the mass of the African people support unity in the same way as they previously supported the various local movements for political independence. Many of the political leaders of French West Africa, for example, did not at first support independence. In 1946, in the French National Assembly, of which he was then a member, Houphouët-Boigny, the president of the Ivory Coast, claimed, this is the president of the Ivory Coast. This was before Nkrumah was president. Oh no, he was the Gold Coast. Ivory Coast is a different place. Claimed there are no separatists on these benches. There is a powerful bond capable of resisting all tests, a moral bond which unites us. It is the ideal of liberty, fraternity, equality, for whose triumphs France has never hesitated to sacrifice its most noble blood. The same policy of the maintenance of unity with France was also supported at that time by President Senghor of Senegal, who said, "The French unity must be a conjunction of civilization, a melting pot of culture. It is a marriage rather than an association." In the same way as mass pressure made it impossible for an African leader to oppose independence, so today mass pressure makes it impossible for him openly to oppose African unity. Those who are against it can only show their opposition in indirect ways by suggesting that the pace towards it is too fast, that this or that plan is impractical, or that there are procedural difficulties which prevent them assisting in formulating a practical plan for it. The case for Africa unity is very strong, and the instincts of the mass of the people are right. This kind of reminds me of how in the United States we are always asking for universal health care. We're always asking for, housing the homeless. We're always asking for making sure that that nobody goes hungry. And they're always like, where's the money going to come from? It's so complex. We have the insurance companies and the pharmaceuticals, and all these people are going to lose their jobs or money or whatever the case may be. And it's just like, okay, you can make things happen if you really wanted to. Look at now, we're in a war, and we spend enough money to put everybody. I don't remember what the example was, but it was like everybody everybody can get free education, with the amount of money that we spent on the war so far with Iran. I don't know what the actual, numbers are, or how many people, or whatever the case may be. Maybe it's everybody that's enrolled in university now. I don't know. But, the point is that we've spent so much money on this war. The money is always possible. Then we're here giving, tax breaks, tax cuts to these billionaires and millionaires, multimillionaires. And it's just like, well, where are we getting the money to afford to give them tax breaks, or lower their taxes? Where are we getting the money to do that? But the thing is that if you want to get the money for whatever you want to do, you will get the money for whatever you want to do. The thing is priority. Who is the priority? How do we prioritize things? We prioritize the wealthy, the millionaires, the billionaires, and then, maybe the scraps go to the rest of us, but it's actually better to not give it to us so that we have the motivation to keep working, and, so that's what that reminds me of. Yeah, so let's continue. In the same way as mass pressure made it impossible for the African leader to oppose independence, so today mass pressure makes it impossible for him to openly oppose African unity. Those who are against it can only show, so we already read that. It is only when the artificial boundaries that divide her are broken down so as to provide for variable economic units and ultimately a single African unit, that Africa will be able to develop industrially for her own sake and ultimately for the sake of the healthy world economy. A common currency is needed, and communications of all kinds must be developed to allow the free flow of goods and services. Hey! Welcome back. All right, let's continue. Actually, for you, we're gonna do a video. Let's do a video. I've been practicing. I did a bunch of screens, and so then the different sources or whatever on OBS, and I'm going to do this and then turn on another one. I think that is the best way for me to work. Anyways, I'm not perfect at this, but let's continue. See? We're in a different screen. We already saw that video. So I haven't seen a lot of these. Let me just make sure to give her a like. Did I give this guy a like too? Give him a like. And let's go to the next. I know you told me something about the things. You told me something about the chat. I have it on screen now. And right now it's not as a best example because I kind of have this on top of it. I have the Instagram thing on top of it. But the thing is that it's so tiny, I can't read it. That's why I have to go back to my other screen to read it. I mean, even with my glasses, I can't do it. All right, let's press play.
Something strange or chaotic is happening around the world. Blaming Britain usually hits the mark. Now, what kind of system steals millions of years of human life from just one island alone? A system they created. Now, listen to this carefully. For the first time, researchers have calculated down to the dollar how much life Britain stole during slavery. 25 million years. Now, 25 million people in their lives that they could have lived, that's different. 25 million years of labor, suffering, and lives stolen. And that number just comes from one island, Barbados. The study found that Britain's slave economy in Barbados extracted so much labor, suffering, and early death that the economic damage today is about $2 trillion. Researchers started with Barbados because it was one of Britain's first and richest slave plantation colonies. Barbados became a model for Britain's plantation system across the Caribbean, and the sugar grown there by enslaved Africans built massive wealth for Britain for generations. The lead researcher said that this isn't about creating an invoice to mail to Britain for reparations, and as we all know, Britain doesn't plan on paying reparations. The purpose behind this was to create a factual accounting of how much damage slavery caused, and to use that data for discussions about reparations and reconciliation, because as we all know, people act brand new when it comes to the transatlantic slave trade and just how to calculate reparations. He said to calculate all of this wasn't that complicated. Here's a quick little summary. The value of the labor that was provided but not compensated is about 500 billion to 700 billion. And
Before she continues, this is one of the things that I have have a hard time with when they say that they don't know how to calculate reparations, because we give reparations. We give reparations all the time. We give reparations to the Jews. We give reparations to to France, to when Haiti decided to get their independence. We give reparations to the slave owners in the United States when the Civil War was won. We've always been able to. We gave reparations in the United States to the Japanese after their the concentration camps and all that stuff. We know how to give reparations. It's just that Black people,
Of course, an enslaved person working in Barbados had much of their life stolen from them as well. It's proper to include the short lifespan of people who were enslaved in Barbados, and the short lifespan estimate is anywhere from 1.1 trillion to 1.3 trillion. If you add them together, you get a range of about 1.6 trillion to 2 trillion as the value of the labor and life directly stolen from people enslaved in Barbados. Just a quick clarification, in 2023, they did a study that estimated that the value of the harms of the transatlantic slave trade in just 31 territories in the Americas and the Caribbean amounted to $131 trillion. That is just 31 territories in the Americas and the Caribbean. Imagine if they include all of the territories they affected. Imagine if they just 31 territories, that they do the research that they did in Barbados for those 31 territories. This number will be exponentially higher. One of the saddest parts of this study is that the researchers openly admit that these numbers will never fully capture the extent of slavery ever. How do you actually calculate stolen generations? How do you calculate lives that were never allowed to fully exist? And even after they tried, they came up with a number that's still almost impossible to comprehend. 25 million years. I hope you learned something new. If something strange or chaotic is happening around the world.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you. The number is astronomical, even by the means that she has just talked about, but that shouldn't stop you from giving anything. There is a starting point, and at the very least, apologize. That is the very least. So I don't buy it. That's just not good enough. Okay. So I'm trying to learn how to do all this. I wanted to show you something since you're late. I actually showed it originally earlier. We were talking about how the French and the Spanish broke down a lot of West Africa into these tiny countries, and because it's easier to control, and that they basically try to encourage them to make their own decisions, to make their own separate decisions on different things, on different contracts, because as long as you keep them separated, then it's easier to control, because if one of those countries doesn't accept a contract, you still have all the others and that sort of thing. It's one of these unjust contracts. We also did discuss like some of France's like predatory things. We ended with France, and they kind of pissed me off. I think I was pissed off the rest of the day because of it. But I wanted to show you like the size and population and in land mass, and I had Claude create this for me. So yeah, so here it is. I mean, Claude created it. So like the names of the countries are in gray, in light gray against white. So, you know, forgive me for that. Oh, why did I do that? But you see here, the smallest country we have Seychelles, and then we have Sao Tome, and then we have Mauritius. I apologize, I'm pronouncing everything wrong. But the point is, we have here. Oh, there it is. You can, yeah. Seychelles has a population of less than 100,000 people. It is an island, so that can be an excuse as well. Sao Tao is also an island, has a population of 227,000. But then you have these, which are, I believe these are inland, 870,000. We have these basically less than 2 million people. You have some that go a little bit, less than 2 million, all of them. And then you see how the land mass is not even that much either. These, just to compare, we have here Germany, France, Spain, Norway, where I'm now, that has almost 6 million. You see how much land we spread out between. But yeah, so I mean, it's beneficial for them to have this these countries all separated. And then I kind of just looked up Seychelles, but you know, it's an island, so it's gorgeous. All it does is makes me want to go there. And I looked up some of like France. We discussed last time, you know, France's dependence on Africa, and in the 2020s and the 2000s, their dependence on a lot of these resources has decreased, except for phosphates. And phosphates was the example that I gave, where they take 100% of it from Morocco. And then now they have 60%. So right now, the basic reason for France to have these neocolonial territory is not resources, it's power. We talked last time about how France was disappointed or basically frowned upon the U.S. and China giving humanitarian aid to some of the colonies or some of the neocolonial territories, and this is why they didn't want to basically lose their influence of these territories. It's really just all about power. Okay, so let's go into the reading again. Okay, so let's just go back to this paragraph. It is, I'm not sure if it's showing up to you. Does it show that I'm scrolling for yours? There's a disconnection here somehow. Well, why are you not scrolling? Interesting. What is happening? Let me open this up real quick. See what's happening. It just disconnected. All right. Let me do full screen again and connect this again. For some reason, it is not doing the thing that it's supposed to do. So let's go back. And no, not the notes. Yes. Okay, perfect. There we go. It just froze for some reason. Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. Okay, It's only when the artificial boundaries that divide her are broken down. So maybe I should read a little bit past that before that. In the same way, yeah, it's hard because every single sentence kind of refers to the last one. We'll just jump here. It is only when the artificial boundaries that divide her are broken down so as to provide for variable economic units and ultimately a single African unit that Africa will be able to develop industrially. For her own sake and ultimately for the sake of a healthy world economy. A common currency is needed and communications of all kinds must be developed to allow a free flow of goods and services. Yeah, a common currency is a big deal. I believe that one probably would be one of the most difficult ones, but, I don't know much about, economics, so I'm not exactly sure. The Economic Commission for Africa has repeatedly emphasized the need for economic planning on a continental scale. The inadequacy of national planning can be demonstrated by a glance at the economies of, for example, Mali and Upper Volta, Niger, and Uganda. These landlocked states, which export large quantities of food products to other African states, cannot remain independent to the agriculture self-sufficiency schemes adopted by their neighbors. Similarly, a national government planning and establishment of a new industry may find that a neighboring state is developing one like it. Such duplication would probably result in waste resources if each was depending on exporting its surpluses to its neighbors. Yeah, I'm always going to have to look over here to see. You don't think so? Oh, does need. Yeah, it absolutely does. Few would argue against the need for economic planning on a national scale. How much stronger is the argument for continental planning? The modern trend is towards larger economic and political units as interdependence of nations and people's growth. No country can be completely self-sufficient or afford to ignore political events outside its borders. Africa is clearly fragmented into too many small, uneconomic, and non-viable states, many of whom are having a very hard struggle to survive. As already noted, others have had a cling to old ties with former colonial rulers and have become easy prey to neocolonialist forces. Some of them have found themselves, whether they like it or not, drawn into the Cold War and into rivalries between foreign powers. The Congo is a notable example. Poor Congo and the things that they're suffering right now. Naturally, each national government is concerned primarily with the welfare of its own citizens. It could only be expected to agree to a policy of unification if the immediate and long-term benefits became so apparent that it would be positively damaging to its citizens not to cooperate. We are faced here with a problem of uneven economic growth. Some African countries are richer in natural resources than others. The less fortunate will need reassurance that their interests will not suffer at the hands of the more developed states. I mean, even if they are, I think that even if the smaller states, face some inconvenience, I would argue that even those inconveniences would be better than the contracts and the stronghold that these neocolonial powers have over them, where they don't even have the opportunity of choice. There are so many African countries, and the resources are duplicated. That is true, but I think that if they make certain agreements, I mean, you always want to produce some of the same resources anyways, just to have like your own country's security. But I think you can limit and then import and export to the rest of the countries to make it so that everybody's doing okay, and you're still bringing in wealth to be able to industrialize or create or build infrastructure. All right. Naturally, each national government is concerned. I already read that. Past economic union experience has not been encouraging. The linking of the Rhodesias and Nyasaland benefited chiefly southern Rhodesia. Kenya has gained principally from the East African Common Market. Uganda and Tanganyika being at best only marginal gainers. In the former French colonial federations, the benefits of economic unity tended to center in Brazzaville, Abidjan, and Dakar. These examples further strengthen the argument for continentally planned economic growth so that all states can benefit from industrialization and other improvements made possible by unified direction. The richer countries will be able to help the poorer. Resources can be pooled and development projects or coordinated to raise the living standards of every African. I think another thing that can kind of motivate for this intermingling per se of these African nations is allowing people to move around from country to country freely. I think when people gain a certain level of wealth, they get accustomed to or want a certain level of security. You don't want to travel to countries where you don't feel safe because their people are not benefiting from the system. And with poverty comes crime. And you see some of these really small countries, they're so beautiful. Why would you not want to visit them? And you don't want them to not do well, That's my example, but I'm sure that there is a lot more complexities to it. I just think that it is possible, especially if you keep your labor. One of the videos that I saw before you got into the chat was this lady talking about how the labor force should be kept here because Africa is losing a lot of its doctors, scientists, engineers to the Western world. So Africa educates them and then they leave because of pay. And the U.S. and other Western countries have programs to, immigration programs so that these people can leave their country because they only want the best, right? But Africa needs to also create its own programs to keep its talents in the country because that is who is going to bring you to the next level. You need these professionals. You need these amazing minds to improve the conditions of the country. Yeah. Okay, let's continue. The time factor is important. As ECA has pointed out, now is the time to act before each state gets too deeply involved in major investments and structural decisions based on narrow national markets. With each month that passes, the foreign interests of neocolonial get a tighter grip of Africa's economic life. This is what makes me want to compare 1965 to today, because this was 1965 and he was worried about this. And I think one of the reasons that I decided to read this book is because somebody told me that it was banned and it was during publications or during the time it was published, it was banned and it was considered, people in the Western world were not allowed to read it. I don't know how they limited it in Africa and that sort of thing, but trying to keep the information from getting out. But this was 1965. I'm sure that many people know what was happening. And he was worried then. I just wonder, how much of that that view of where things were going to go is true. I mean, I imagine 100% of it, considering the fact that the manufacturing has improved 0% since 1965, and that is the main thing that he has told us up until this point. That is how we get ourselves or get Africa out of this situation and the conditions that it currently faces. This might be a wild take, but I think of a downgrade of countries to sites and regions would be highly beneficial. you'd have standard laws, social assistance, and better political system. Not perfect, but better. A downgrade of countries to cities and regions. A downgrade of countries to cities and regions. So what you're saying is like to make Africa a country and then make all of the other countries cities? Is that what you're trying to say? Let me know if that's what you're trying to say, because that is crazy. That is crazy. That is crazy. That's crazy. But hey, listen, earlier I said something, the book mentioned it, how like everybody's a naysayer, you know, like where are we going to get the money from it? It's so impractical, you know, it's so this and so that, it's so difficult. I mean, we see that in the US a lot with us just trying to get people like living wage, to get people like healthcare, to get people to like not be homeless, to get people to like have food, you know, like these basic things. And they're just like, well, where are we going to get the money from to get people education? And then you see like how much we've spent in this war with Iran. And there was like some report where it said like we spent as much money as it would take to like get everybody like free college. You know, I don't know what the time period was or what the details were, but like get everybody to have free college education. That's insane. You know, we always can get the money, you know, and also like, so they can find the money for this war. They're asking for a bunch more money now for the military. They're always find the ways, the means to lower taxes for the billionaires and the millionaires and give them more tax exempt opportunities and all this stuff. And nobody's asking like, where do we get the money? Like if we look, where do we get the money from? How are we going to be able to do that? Nobody's asking that, you know, when it comes to the billionaires and the millionaires and war and military equipment and all this stuff. But when it comes to like the people's way of survival, there's always a but. So even though your idea is crazy, because it does sound insane, so the city of Nigeria or Congo or Somalia. Yeah, I mean, I think the only reason that it sounds crazy to me, because I think it's totally possible, but I think the reason that it sounds crazy to me is because of how big Africa is. So it is huge. It is really, really huge. And, you know, I don't know how, you know, you can have that much control over it. When it comes to like establishing the system originally. I think once it's already established, it's going to be fine. But like establishing the system originally sounds like would be really hard. But yeah, I think it's possible, right? Anything is possible. I think at the very least, they need to unite as countries and they need to have some commonality, some things that they can agree on. You know, currency is one. Free passport flow. These are things that they're working on now. So I think those were good ideas. I think that, you know, investing in each other instead of the stock market of the Western world is something for the people that do have the funds. And just keeping your people there so that they can build more incentives for people inside the country. Like these are like the minor problems. I think I'm like worried about like right now, and you're like looking at like way into the future. But I think it's a good idea. I put in, let's full screen it. I looked up the video that you let's see, close this. You suggested another part of the what is it called? The Gods, American Gods. Is that what it's called? Yeah. And you suggested a scene, so I'm gonna go ahead and put that on now. I haven't seen it, so.
I am old as dirt, and I've seen things as you have. Why do you bring this rage to my doorstep?
I am not a god, in the sense that I can tolerate exploitation, oppression, and repression. My worshipers know freedom ain't free. They know the most potent weapon of control for the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. They know slavery is not a condition. Slavery is a cult. Human trafficking is a cult. Slavery got a rebrand like motherfucking the alt-right. And to make matters worse, these dazzling new plantation owners built a pipeline to take our children from school to prison quicker than a cut can bleed. And the lucky ones go from school to the NFL, where they don't even let them niggas take a knee. They've been programmed from birth with shitty food options, contaminated drinking water, gun violence, police brutality. How much longer can we afford to wait? You keep track of days, numbering the years for scribes that record human history. Do you see progress? I count 1, 2, 3 African gods in this room. And 2 of them want to exercise restraint? And let the donkey walk continue while you live your best life. War is upon us. An old white lady is dead. Wednesday avenges Uriah Bertrania, but if it was a dead black lady, like this sweet old soul, Churning Boggs' hammer would not swing.
Sorry, I don't have I don't have membership, so I have to go through. I have to watch the commercials. Oh, it was done anyways. All right. So let's just.
Hey everybody, I'm going to be hosting
this.
The Daily Show this week.
Yeah, I like him. I haven't decided to get the full membership. Yeah, you've motivated me. I haven't had time to watch it. So I'm gonna look it up. You said it's on Netflix? Yeah. I'll look for it. Okay, let's get back to the. Oh yes, and you said that the Soviet Union did it, and they have a large mass of land. Yeah. I mean, I just think it's very, very difficult because you would have to. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I like I said, I'm reading these books so that I know I can find solutions. I can think outside of the box. I'm still relatively in the box, so I'm still kind of enclosed in what I know and the impossibilities of certain things. And I haven't yet opened the doors to all of the possibilities, I think. And I don't know much about, the communist ideas either. I have an idea, but I think most of what I know has been taught to me by this Western education system, and I have an inclination that is not so. That there are some gaps in my education, and I just wonder because I mean we see all of the countries that are per se communist as being completely punished, and you see these dictator-like people, and part of me, based on my education system, believe that might be the only way you can do something like that, and it just seems like a very difficult thing. You would have to have a conference of all of these leaders, because nobody wants to give up power, not even the African presidents and African leaders. This is not something that human nature is human nature. Yes, people have been downgraded by this colonial system to less than, but the wealthier version of that are still going to behave like the rich, Honestly, the series isn't that great, but the scenes. Okay, all right. So you're basically telling me not to watch it, just search the scenes, and I'll basically quench my thirst that way. All right, let's go back to the reading. Okay. All right. I'm pretty sure I read that first paragraph, but let's just do it anyways again. The time factor is important. As ECA has pointed out, now is the time to act. Before each state gets too deeply involved in major investment and structural decisions based on narrow national markets, with each month that passes, the foreign interests of neocolonialism get a tighter grip of Africa's economic life. Oh yeah, this is what we were saying, like, is it too late? Because this was 1965. But I don't think it's too late. I just think that every time we try, the leaders get murdered and the countries go into war. And, this is what we're seeing in Mali now. And, the comparatively recent penetration of, this is an interesting word, penetration of American big business into Africa points once again to the danger of neocolonialism. So also does the combining of large firms to form powerful monopolies. How can some of our smaller states hope to bargain successfully with powerful foreign combines, some of which control financial empires worth more than the state's total revenue? Yeah, exactly. This is why I'm saying, like, even if the countries combine, maybe not in your extreme method, but let's just say as countries in a system, the smaller countries don't have to worry too much about like getting the short end of the stick. They might actually get the short end of the stick, but is it going to be shorter than what they're getting? I doubt it. The smaller the state and the more formidable the foreign interest, the less likely are the conditions or economic independence to be met. For example, Ghana, because of its economic size and alternative industries, has been in a stronger position for bargaining with the aluminum companies than much smaller and economically more limited Togo can hope to be in dealing with French phosphate interests. The domination of Africa's economy by foreign firms must be ended if we are to achieve rounded economic growth, and this can only be done through unified action. Something in the nature of an economic revolution is required. Our development has been held back for too long by the colonial-type economy. We need to reorganize entirely so that each country can specialize in producing the goods and crops for which it is best suited. As I'm reading this, I'm getting I'm just thinking like Kwame is past. He would probably be. I'm sure he's just rolling in his grave. The fact that nothing has changed since 1965. With economic unity, those countries in Africa which are beginning to establish modern industries would benefit from wider markets. We would all be in a better bargaining position to obtain higher prices for our goods and to establish adequate taxation of foreign factor earnings. In fact, a whole new pattern of economic development would be made possible. Agriculture could be modernized more quickly with more capital at its disposal, which is the reason why they're producing more, but they're still getting paid. They're losing money. They're earning less than they were making, years, 20, 40 years ago from 1965. And I'm pretty sure from now as well, let's move on. Agriculture could be modernized for more quickly with more capital at its disposal. Industries on a larger and more economic scale could be planned. These could afford to make use of new techniques involving heavy capital outlay. Smaller plants planned to meet only national needs are likely to have higher costs and are eventually less able to reduce costs than optimize size units. National planning bodies would still have a very important part to play in a unified Africa. They would, for example, supply essential information about local conditions, but their work would be made easier with the experience, advice, and help of a single planning body keeping an eye on Africa's interests as a whole. The research and training in development projects already being carried out by the ECA Development Institute in Dakar would be strengthened to serve both the continental and national bodies. Expensive failures due to lack of coordination would be avoided. A case in point is the Inga Dam project, which is to provide power for a sugar refinery, a plastics and hardboard from sugarcane waste complex in Bangui, which in turn will ship bulk plastics to a plastic products industry in Brazzaville. Obviously, there should be a planning body able to phase and harmonize construction timing for the Brazzaville and the Bangui plants and power lines from Inga to Bangui and Brazzaville, and the transportation services between Bangui and Brazzaville and the dam itself. Okay, so basically he's just saying you would still need a planning, you would still need some people, some oversight, that kind of oversight for what's going on, what's needed, and also look out for the African countries and the African continent. I also think that, if Africa is united, all of these different countries that are going through hardships, hardships is like a really soft word for the things that are going on, but that the African Union would be able to step in and represent and make sure that they are looking after the interests of the people, of the governments of the country that is in question. And I'm thinking right now of the Democratic Republic of Congo. There's like a helicopter that's over my apartment. So like right now where we have to figure out what the problem is. We have to figure out how to solve it, whatever. And then you have, was it Congo? No, it was Sudan. It was either the Congo or Sudan, where they were like, we need to figure this out. There's we need to find a solution, but like there was nobody there from the actual country representing the country. I'm pretty sure. No, I still don't 100% know. Let's see. Money corrupts, and that's why I despise it. I didn't read the first ones. Let's see. It's not the full thing, but it's a good snippet. Oh, you were talking about the series. Okay, so I did read everything. Yeah, money does corrupt. It does suck. I don't know what to say about that. It's unfortunate. Since 1963, 22 African presidents have been assassinated, at least 6 revolutionary leaders, and 106 coups d'etat. Yeah. I mean, it's threatening, right? Even if they're not benefiting from the resources that they're gaining, we already know. Kwame already told us that it is not just about making money; it's about power. And that's why they get mad when another country, another superpower comes and like, hey, you're not being treated well by so-and-so. How about we help you with, this problem that you have with your population? Because it's about soft power in a sense, but then it's also about just power in general, because now you have a military, you have army, you have a base, you have the resources that you need if you need them, when you need them. It's everything. It's just power. It's just, what can you say? All right. In the process of obtaining economic unity, there is bound to be much hard bargaining between the various states. Integration of different aspects of economic policy will proceed at different rates, and there may be disappointing delays and compromises to be worked out. But given the will to succeed, difficulties can be resolved. And I pray for the West African countries right now that are trying to unite, that they can find this solution, and that more of them start to unite as well. I pray that this is something that they can push back against all of these assassination attempts and push back against all of this propaganda to make these leaders seem like terrible dictators or whatever, when in reality they are helping their country. And some of the things that the numbers of people dead and all the stuff that they have under them, their name, is because of the shit that that the West is putting on their country. I would link the sources, but links are generally not allowed on Twitch. No worries. No worries. I believe you. I know that you're looking things up, so I believe you. If anything, after the stream, I always tend to go back and do some research. Oh, actually, let's take a break now, because we were talking about Nigeria and the oil, and I mentioned how there was an oil company of this, this rich millionaire, billionaire, I don't know how, whatever, that owns one of the biggest oil refineries, is doing things to make it so that the Africans will invest in Africa and help themselves, rise from their situations to gain wealth by investing in his company. So did you look it up? Let me see. All right, so that's yours. Okay, so let's see. Let's go to what I found. There we are. Okay, so this was the company. Dangote. This is the guy. So it calls for African Renaissance driven by investment and integration and industrialization. Africa's richest industrialized oil tycoon, I guess. And he's basically transforming the continent's economic fortunes, calling for bold investments and deeper regional integration. I just think there's a really good example of somebody trying to do good, trying to change things. And, God knows how he became super rich, but he's an African rich guy. I always think whenever I see people that are super, super rich, I already know that they have been doing some extracting. You can't get to a level of richness without doing some crazy evil shit. But, that's my opinion. I don't know, how rich the people that decide to view me are or not. But that is my opinion. But a quote that he said, at some point I asked myself, how do we move from potential to reality? Dangote said, noting that systemic barriers such as restrictive visa regimens, inefficient border processes, costly transportation networks continue to stifle intra-African trade. He cited personal experience revealing that he requires up to 38 visas to travel across the continent. That's insane. A challenge he says, undermines investment and collaboration. Yeah, I mean, imagine, it's insane. Without free movement of people, goods, and services, there is no way Africa can prosper. See, another smart man, basically saying the same thing our Kwame basically is saying. Let's read some more quotes of his. At the time we started, no African country except a few had sufficient refining capacity. We had to change that. He says, adding that the project faced skepticism from global industry players who doubted his feasibility. Okay, so basically I just wanted to show you some of the things that he is doing. I have 4 articles. I'm just going to skim them. Or maybe just kind of read the headlines. Aliko Dangote wants to keep African wealth in Africa. He is building a vehicle in Kenya to make that possible. So Aliko Dangote is exploring a Kenya-based investment vehicle that would let African savers across the continent pull capital directly into Dangote Group companies and collect dividends in U.S. dollars. So, I mean, it sucks that it's U.S. dollars, but, until Africa has its own currency, that, whatever. You have to do what you have to do. And he's trying to help the regular, everyday folk to gain something. This is another headline I found. Where is it? What is the Dangote refinery IPO? Okay, so yeah, so they're going to be an IPO. So we're going to be able to, I think anybody can invest in his company. As the historic Dangote refinery IPO nears, here's a quick guide to keep dates, estimated share prices. Okay, we're not going to go into that. What was this one? This was the last article that I found. Dangote Group targets 40 billion investments to boost fertilizer oil output. The Dangote Group is targeting at least 40 billion in investments to fund a 5-year plan to expand its fertilizer and oil refinery. The African Export-Import Bank confirmed the initiative in a statement on Wednesday. The initiative comes amid global supply disruptions stemming from the Persian Gulf conflict, underlining the need for local production to reduce Africa's dependence on imports. Hell yeah. The expansion plan aims to scale up fertilizer output and refine oil production, positioning Nigeria as a regional hub for both energy and crop nutrients. I mean, this is, you guys can read this on your own if you want to know more, but this is what I'm talking about. Like, we need more of these type of millionaires or billionaires. I don't know what the hell he is, but we need more of these type of people that actually want to improve the conditions of the everyday people. I mean, what else do you have all of that money for? And also, like, it's, if you can't look at your fellow human being and be like, I want you to do better, then, what good are you? Why are you taking up space? That's my opinion, of course. Maybe not the best opinion, but whatever. Okay. In general, the broader the front of which economic unity is launched, the quicker the goals and policies of a fully developed Africa can be achieved. This is basically what you were saying. An all-African planning body could take immediate steps towards the development of large-scale industry and power, for the removal of barriers to inter-African trade, and for the creation of a central bank and the formation of a unified policy on all aspects of export control, tariff, and quota arrangements. The ECA has carried out several surveys designed to provide information to help in the making of decisions on these points. Dangote comes from generation wealth. His family was a director of Nigeria's Shell BP, and grandfather traded with the British. Okay. I mean, there's a relationship with the British, you know what I mean? Nothing super shady, but seems like they mostly clean, just opportunists. Okay. I mean, listen, that's gonna happen. That's part of the world that we live in today, but if you can look around and be like, I want to make better the circumstances of my fellow human beings, my fellow African, whatever. I mean, I'm partly sure that the part of the reason that he wants things to be more unified in Africa is so that he can more easily travel. I mean, you always kind of also think about yourself. You also want to be able to travel to places, beautiful places in Africa, and see see beauty. You want to feel safe. These are things that you yourself want to do for yourself, but to get there you have to help others. So sometimes it is a selfish thing, and I don't really care where the motivation comes from, actually. Okay. Among immediate needs are the manufacture in Africa of agricultural machinery of all kinds to speed up the modernization of agriculture and maybe make more money based on how much you actually put out, for goodness sakes. We need supplies of electrical equipment for use in the growing electric power production essential for industrial growth. Mining and industrial machinery must be produced in Africa to lower the cost of developing are mineral resources. Construction machinery and supplies, chemicals, fertilizers, plastics are all urgently required, and Africa must produce them for her own requirements. Reports of the ECA industrial coordination missions to different regions in Africa suggest that the production of iron and steel, non-ferrous metals, engineering supplies, chemicals, and fertilizers, cement, paper, and textiles should be developed on an inter-African basis, since their efficiency depends on large-scale production, and also because you would probably sell it to each other at a fair price to help with your margins, and because you have all the resources to produce those things. Those are other reasons. Other industries which can run efficiently on a smaller scale can be planned nationally. The location of the various industries will, of course, depend on many factors such as the availability of power, mineral deposits, nearness to processing plants, markets, and so on. Production of aluminum and copper, for example, will have to be developed in those countries where the essential resource and cheap power are available. The manufacturing of aluminum and copper products, however, need not take place in the countries producing the metals. Similarly, the production of cotton is limited to certain climate regions, while cotton textiles industries can be developed further afield. So a lot of this information I do not need, to be honest, but I think that it's really good that he put it in this book, because those people that are, and I imagine those governmental heads, because I see some of the things that he's suggesting here being being done by some of these countries that are just recently, trying to kind of step out of this neocolonial state and into the developed, which crazy. It's the countries that right now have like the most instability and a lot of attacks and a lot of guns coming from nowhere and all this instability. Like, they're facing instabilities, but they're the ones that are actually trying to get out of this neo-colonial system. I wonder if it's a coincidence that they're facing these instabilities at the same time as they're trying to build their economy. I wonder. Every African state has some contribution to make to the economic whole. There are, for instance, no known deposits of potash in West Africa, but requirements can be met from North Africa, Ethiopia, and possibly also from the Congo and Gabon. Plans for nitrogenous fertilizers production in Zambia have already been worked out. The plants could be supplied with coal from Rhodesia. I really wish there was a version of this book for today, but I imagine that a lot of this stuff has not changed. And low-cost power from the Victoria Falls, Kenya, with its large forest reserves, could become the center of a wood distillation complex able to supply the countries of East and Central Africa with gas, acetone, methanol, and tar. There are many other examples too numerous to describe. The urgent need to plan industrial development on a continental scale must not, however, blind us to the equally important need to do the same for agriculture, fishing, and forestry. In the role of industry in development, some fallacies, Dudley Sears has pointed out the interdependence of agriculture and industry. Materials are needed for growing industries. More important, the swelling town labor force needs to be fed, and this implies that a rising surplus of food has to be produced in the countryside. To overemphasize industry, has some countries have found to their cost, leads paradoxically in the end to a slower rate of industrialization. So you have to be smart. People have to be fed, you have to do a surplus, all that stuff. But at the end, if people are fed because they have jobs, you're heading in the right direction. The little things. Slower industrialization, sure, but people being fed, yeah, even better. African states are important importing larger amounts of food than ever before. Look at here, from abroad. This trend must be stopped immediately. Also, the fashion industry is failing. A lot of Shein clothing that we have all learned have poisons in them, are being sent to them. We wear them once and then you donate them, and they all go to Africa. And Africa's culture, the wealth of culture, is dying because they're not able to produce all of this amazing, beautiful clothing that they naturally do. What they need to do is industrialize that, build, keep the African culture, the richness of its clothing and all of that stuff, and also, the health of the people wearing this clothes. Those are just things I consider to be quite important as well. I'm not sure how important other people think they are, but I think they are. You have to preserve culture. As an industry, there can be specialization so that each region or state concentrates on producing the agriculture products for which it is best suited. For instance, it is wasteful for each West African state to try to be self-sufficient in rice when Senegal's Casamance district would be well able to supply the need. Equally, Mali and Upper Volta are obvious exports of fresh, tinned, and processed meat, while coastal states would supply fresh, tinned, and smoked fish. Yeah, next time I'm gonna have the pop-up thing so that I can read your thing, because I have to always every time I see something I have to go over here. African textiles are so beautiful and so high quality. I mean, they're gorgeous. They're gorgeous. I see some of these videos of it takes 3 days to do these these wedding dresses or these just these beautiful dresses, and all handmade. I mean, I think just from that, they would be making so much money. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay, a further argument for unified agriculture policy is implied in the need to step up efforts to combat many of the obstacles to economic growth. Locust, the TSE, the tis fly, I don't know, the TSE fly, and plant diseases are no respecters of political frontiers. Research into their control would benefit from a pooling of brain power and technical know-how. So also would medicine and social services. How much greater the chance of wiping out major epidemic diseases like river blindness and sleeping sickness if action against them is so coordinated and unified. I didn't even know about these. Sleeping sickness and river blindness. They sound awful. They sound terrifying, to be honest. Yeah, another reason why you want to keep your doctors and your scientists in the continents. You have to produce incentives for them to stay. It's a shame or for them to return. Transport and communications are also sectors where unified planning is needed. Roads, railways, waterways, airlines must be made to serve Africa's needs, not the requirements of foreign interests. Communications between African states are quite inadequate. In many cases, it is still easier to travel from an airport in Africa to Europe or America than to go from one African state to another. I hope this is not the case. I mean, Dangote basically already told us that it is. So, because, passports, they have different power. You need visas for certain passports. You don't need visas for others. And I imagine that Africa probably holds, I don't know what the situation is now, to be honest, because I do know that they were building a passport that you can use all over. I wonder what the development of that is these days. But if Dangote is not using them, then it probably isn't done, because he's super wealthy. He would be using it. Economic unity, to be effective, must be accompanied by political unity. The two are inseparable, each necessary for the future greatness of our continent and the full development of our resources. There are several examples of major unions of states in the world today. If in Africa must unite, I describe some of the more important ones and warned against the danger of regional federations in Africa. Regional federations. I would love to know what that means. Okay, I actually am coming to the end of my time. What is sad is the equipment that's in medical and scientific universities in the West are built with African resources. I mean, that is sad. That is sad. And I wonder how many of those equipments the African universities have and how many the African labs have. You know, it's all a big con, you know, like you build them, you ship them, and then you have to buy them back at the prices, at the marked up prices. And so the scientists don't have the equipment, so obviously they have to leave. But we need them to come back so that they can do their discoveries, because it's one thing to leave for education, it's another thing to offer your intellectual wealth to the country that you left to, the colonizers. To the colonizers. I think that that's something that, this is part of the education system. I think the African education system needs to include some of these works so that, you know, to get to become a doctor, to become a scientist, to become an engineer, you have to read some of this revolutionary work so that you know the importance of staying in your continent. But of course, the countries themselves also need to provide incentives, because at the end of the day, people need to get paid, you need to eat, you know, so they will go to where they're going to get paid more, and if that's the West, then they're probably going to do that. Okay, Big Bunny, thank you so much for popping in. Anyone else that is on the chat, thank you for listening. We will pick up tomorrow at 2:30 my time. Up again for 2 hours, and I'll start off with a summary. Thank you so much, and I will see you. I'm going to read what you said before I leave. A good program would be the government subsidizes or pay for them to go overseas for the education on the premises that they return. That is a good idea. All right, well, thank you so much. I will see you tomorrow. Yeah, all right, we'll pick up tomorrow. See you.